The 1990 Formula One World Championship began here in Phoenix, Arizona, the first of 16 stops on the Grand Prix trail. The countdown to the series had seen a tremendous build-up. The prospects were great. This would be no pushover for the McLaren team, for Ferrari had shown particularly well in pre-season testing. But there were new faces in each camp, with reigning champion Alain Prost going to Ferrari from McLaren, swapping seats with Austria's Gerhard Berger. Williams were taking Renault into their second season, with Thierry Boutsen and Riccardo Patrese driving, while Nelson Piquet had joined Alessandro Nannini at Benetton. As we waited on the grid, there was already one surprise, for Gerhard Berger had claimed his first pole position for McLaren. But at the first corner, there was another, as Jean Alesi brought the Tyrrell through to lead this first Grand Prix of the season. First casualty of the race itself was Riccardo Patrese's nose cone, taken off by the new man at Osella, Olivier Gouillard. Patrese headed for the pits, so too did Nannini after damaging a wheel against Bernd Schneider's arrows. Alesi led, pulling away from Berger in second place, while his teammate Ayrton Senna had moved ahead of third-placed Andrea De Cesaris in the Dallara. But Berger spun out and into the tyres after his foot slipped and caught the throttle pedal. Damage to the rear wing necessitated a pit stop, which dropped him well back. Prost retired after running fourth, when his smoking gearbox finally ran out of oil, and De Cesaris was out with a broken engine. Senna, now up to second place, caught leader Alesi as the race neared half distance. Honda V10 against Cosworth's old V8 seemed a foregone conclusion, but Alesi isn't in racing to follow any form, and he fought back, retaking the lead. This was not the sort of behaviour that Senna was used to, but he would later say that it had inspired him. A lap later, he had another go at Alesi, and this time he tried hard to block Alesi's continued attempts to get back in front. But Senna finally managed to hold on to his lead and pull away. Any Ferrari threat finally disappeared when Mansell's engine expired spectacularly after the Englishman had run in fifth place. Senna continued to pull away from Alesi to score his 21st Grand Prix victory, one which, he said, would give him the motivation for the season after the previous year's disappointments and frustrations and the controversies of the off-season. Alesi gave notice of his promise with second place, and Boutsen was a lonely third. So the Brazilian led the World Championship as the circus headed for his home city, Sao Paulo, and the newest stop on the Grand Prix trail, the reconstructed Interlagos circuit. Appropriately enough, Senna led from pole position, from teammate Berger next, while behind, Alesi found himself sandwiched and eased out De Cesaris, who made a spectacular and rapid exit. As Senna led and began to pull away, we see what happened again. Alesi slotted himself in between Patrese and De Cesaris. Someone had to make room, and the Dallara driver was the one to lose out. Meanwhile, Senna led, Berger close behind in second from Boutsen, Prost, Mansell, Patrese and Alesi, while Nannini was heading for the pits to have a front wing replaced after being involved in the De Cesaris incident. Berger, whose lanky frame didn't fit comfortably in the confines of the McLaren cockpit during these early races, was caught by Boutsen in the Williams Renault. The Belgian nipped out of the slipstream to move up into second place. Further back, Alboreto and Gouillard wanted the same piece of track at the first corner, and arrows bundled Oka Osella into the matching mud. Soon, Prost caught third-placed Berger and lined up to imitate Boutsen's overtaking manoeuvre, making the best use of the slipstream, nipping out just before the braking area and moving up into third place on lap 18. Prost soon began to pull away. A brakeless Boutsen was the first of the leading trio to pit for new tyres, but he overshot his pit, hit a rear tyre and a mechanic. Once new tyres and nose cone were fitted, he had slipped to 13th place. Senna had a comfortable lead when, lapping Nakajima, the Japanese driver swung back across the McLaren and took off its nose section. Senna had to make a second pit stop, which put him back to third place, 27 seconds behind his teammate. Nakajima later apologised for his manoeuvre. So Prost led with an ever more comfortable advantage over Berger. Patrese retired from 5th place when leaking oil caught fire with 6 laps to go. He had just had to allow Mansell's Ferrari past into 4th place. So Alain Prost scored a well-earned victory, the 40th in his remarkable career, his first for Ferrari and his 6th in Brazil. Berger finished second ahead of his own teammate Ayrton Senna. The Brazilian once again denied that elusive home win, but leading the World Championship in these early stages. The Tifosi, of course, loved Prost's win and turned up in their thousands at Imola for the San Marino Grand Prix. But the beloved red cars were pushed back to the third row behind McLaren's and Williams's. At the start, Berger made the better getaway. But as everyone sorted themselves out, Mansell got onto the grass, sending up a cloud of dust, and everyone behind moved left, causing Capelli and Nakajima to collide. At the first corner, Alesi pushed the Ferraris over to make space, and Donnelly had a spin, causing Suzuki to take avoiding action. Thankfully, no one was hurt in all this drama, although Nakajima's car was badly damaged. Going down to the Acqua Minerale chicane on lap 1, Nelson Piquet eased himself between the two Ferraris to take 7th place from Alain Prost, while ahead of him was Mansell. Senna led, but his lead was short-lived. Braking for Rivazza, his McLaren slewed sideways, and Boutsen took the lead as a powerless Senna went off into the sand trap, a broken wheel having caused a flat tyre. That left Boutsen leading from Berger after 5 laps. Behind Patrese and Mansell, Piquet had taken 5th place from Alesi when the Frenchman fought back, causing the Brazilian to spin, which put him back to 11th place. Boutsen buzzed his engine with a missed gear change, which caused his retirement, allowing Berger into the lead. Mansell, meanwhile, was charging through the field, and even though his car was smoking ominously, he took 2nd place from Riccardo Patrese on lap 22. However, the Ferrari's progress was briefly checked by this incident with Andrea De Cesaris. Next, the Englishman caught Gerhard Berger and immediately tried to overtake him with dire consequences. The Austrian later apologised for this incident, which might have been so much more serious. Mansell's afternoon ended when his oil finally ran out. And this elevated Patrese to 2nd place. Patrese then overtook Berger, the McLaren driver unable to do anything about the flying Williams. In the closing stages, Prost, after a pit stop to replace flat-spotted tyres, tried hard to take 3rd place off Benetton's Alessandro Nannini. But at the checkered flag, it was Patrese avenging the victory lost 7 years before. Berger was 2nd, while Nannini held off Prost to finish 3rd. Local boy Patrese was a popular winner, and Nannini from Siena was a popular 3rd. 2 weeks later, the championship was in Monaco for the most glamorous but also one of the most testing races on the calendar. Ayrton Senna was again on pole position with Alain Prost beside him, and at the start it was Senna who took the lead from the Frenchman, with Alesi going into 3rd place ahead of Berger and the Williamses. Going down to Mirabeau for the first time, Prost left the door open for Alesi to overtake, and Berger tried to follow him, but hit the back of Prost's Ferrari. There was chaos as the track was blocked. Further back, Modena rode over a Lotus's rear wheel. At the restart, the story was pretty much the same, with Senna again grabbing the lead from Prost in the spare Ferrari, followed by Alesi in the Tyrrell, then Berger also in the spare McLaren. Patrese and Martini followed. This time, Prost kept the door firmly closed on Alesi. Berger was left to tail the Tyrrell. Trying to make up places, 7th-placed Mansell hit Boutsen's Williams at the chicane, losing a front wing. He had to pit for a new nose section. Leader Senna was able to pull away from the second-place battle in spite of back markers such as Nakajima. And that second-place battle lost Prost with battery failure, leaving Alesi holding off Berger. Nelson Piquet chased Thierry Boutsen for 5th place, but when he tried to overtake, the Brazilian spun at the Lowe's hairpin and stalled the car. It was his only retirement in the first half of the season. After Patrese had retired, Boutsen moved up to 4th and was finally overtaken successfully by Mansell. Behind them on the road was the great duel for 2nd place, which was virtually race-long. Berger tailing the impressive, if inexperienced, Alesi for lap after lap, but unable to get past the Tyrrell driver as they lapped Boutsen and closed on Mansell. But the Englishman's days were numbered, and after a fighting drive, he retired from 4th place with no gears. In the closing stages, Alesi and Berger drastically cut the gap between themselves and leader Senna as the Frenchman continued to withstand the Austrian's advances. But Senna paced himself all the way to the checkered flag and his 3rd Monaco victory, with Alesi and Berger close behind. The Brazilian now had a 6-point lead in the World Championship over his own teammate, with Alesi 3rd. It may look like some tempting beach resort, but the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal was as damp as its surroundings, at least to begin with. Senna was on pole for the 4th consecutive Grand Prix, but teammate Berger was judged to have jumped the start and was given a minute's penalty. Senna duly took the lead from Berger, Nannini, Prost, Alesi and Piquet, with Boutsen next. First spinner in the treacherous conditions was Pierluigi Martini at the 2nd corner. On the road, Senna led from Berger. Then came Nannini and Alesi, who had overtaken Prost. But soon the rain eased and the track began to dry out. Everyone, including leader Senna, headed for the pits and slick tyres, although the track was still damp. Senna's early stop left Nannini leading, while the Brazilian was happy to let teammate Berger past, knowing that he had a minute's penalty. Nannini hit a groundhog, which caused a flat tyre and damaged wing, so he needed a 2nd pit stop, as did Jean Alesi after hitting Thierry Boutsen's Williams. But Boutsen was heading for more trouble. For as he lined up to take 3rd place off Prost, he put 2 slick-shod wheels on the wet track and slid round into the innocent Nicola Larini. And that put them both out, while Prost continued unscathed. Nannini did virtually the same thing, leaving his Benetton in a tyre barrier. Minutes later, Alesi got offline trying to overtake De Cesaris' Delara, and suddenly he too was a passenger as his Tyrrell skidded off uncontrollably into Nannini's abandoned Benetton, thankfully now driverless. Alesi was also unhurt. Nelson Piquet overtook Prost to move into second place on what was nearly a dry track, while Mansell was also looming in his teammates' mirrors as the Frenchman wrestled with flat-spotted tyres and poor brakes. Mansell was easily able to move up into third place on lap 50. Berger's low downforce setup proved quicker than Senna's on the drier track, and he took the checkered flag, but his penalty meant that it was the Brazilian who claimed victory from Piquet in second place and Mansell third. Berger pipped Prost for fourth. 35 trucks transported the World Championship down to Mexico City for round 6 of the series 2 weeks later, where once again McLaren claimed pole, but this time with Gerhard Berger. However, he was beaten by fellow front row man Riccardo Patrese on the long drag down to the first corner. The Italian successfully defended his lead, first from Berger and then from Senna. The Brazilian moving into second place ahead of his teammate, followed by Boutsen and the rest. Senna nipped out of the slipstream to try and overtake Patrese, but the Italian was having none of it. Behind the McLarens came Boutsen and Piquet, then Mansell and Alesi, Warwick, Martini and Donnelly. Prost was way back after his qualifiers failed to work. As they neared the end of lap 1, Senna was placing himself strategically to get past Patrese. And Brazilian duly overtook Italian as they flashed across the line, while Berger followed his teammate through at the first corner. But the Austrian made an early stop from second place to change blistered tyres on lap 13 and rejoin 12th. Mansell was on another of his charges and duly took second place from Piquet just after half distance. Berger was also making up places, overtaking the disappointing Patrese for 8th place. Piquet pitted for tyres, which elevated a charging Prost to 3rd place, and the flying Frenchman then demoted his own teammate with 15 laps to go. Leader Senna was less than 9 seconds ahead and in tyre trouble. With 10 laps remaining, he was caught by both the Ferraris. Senna had no reply when Prost overtook. The Brazilian's right rear tyre exploded 4 laps later, and it was clear that a slow puncture had been his problem all along. After a spin, Mansell was caught by the flying Berger, who muscled his way into second place, but the Englishman wasn't going to let him get away with that. A lap later, he swept past Berger back up to second place and followed Alain Prost home to a great Ferrari 1-2 after the best race of the year so far. The tranquility of the harbour at Bandol contrasted sharply with the action a few miles away at Circuit Paul Ricard, where Ferrari's revised V12 helped Mansell claim pole for the French Grand Prix. The Englishman led down into the first corner, closely challenged by Berger, with Senna up to third from Nannini fourth, then Patrese and Prost, and our cameraman Boutsen getting a knock from Capelli. Thankfully, there was none of the chaos of last year this time. But Berger was already lining himself up to take Mansell on the Mistral straight. and he swept past halfway round lap 1. Senna was soon lining up to do the same thing, moving into second place a lap later at the same place. And that left Mansell to hold off Nannini, Patrese and Prost. Boutsen was an early retirement from 7th place with engine failure, while Alesi lost the same place with broken transmission. Prost was the first from the top 6 to pit for new tyres, dropping from 6th to 8th, as Senna moved up ahead of Berger, the Austrian promptly heading for the pits for a tyre change. However, both McLaren pit stops were more than 12 seconds in duration. Mansell's was 7 seconds quicker than Senna's. Patrese was now leading, but he had Capelli behind him, and the Leighton House driver was elevated from non-qualifier in Mexico to leader in France by new aerodynamics, including revised floor, as well as not stopping for tyres, whereas Patrese came in. Mauricio Gugelmin was in second place, but had been caught by Prost and Nannini. Capelli was doing a great job ahead, while behind him, Prost was struggling to overtake his teammate. But then Gugelmin retired with a blown engine after his scavenge pump broke. Mansell retired his Ferrari from 7th place, once he'd found a parking place, with similar engine problems. Prost, on the newer tyres, began to catch Capelli, but catching was one thing, overtaking another, until the Italian made a slight mistake and the Frenchman nipped past to the great delight of his compatriots. And a few laps later, he headed for the checkered flag to win at home for the 4th time. Capelli was a very popular 2nd place, while Senna was thankful to salvage 3rd place. A week later, battle was joined at Silverstone, where Mansell magic worked wonders, after a brief hiccup for the Englishman to claim his 2nd pole position in 8 days. But at the start, Senna rocketed forwards to head the Englishman into the first corner. Behind these two came Prost and Berger, then Boutsen, Alesi and the rest, all making it through the first corner safely. On lap 9, Mansell nipped out of Senna's slipstream to lead, but briefly, as the Englishman ran wide, allowing Senna back into the lead again. Berger wasn't far behind. But 2 laps later, Mansell tried again. And this time, he held on to his lead to the great delight of his compatriots, although the McLarens were still close behind. But then Senna got up onto a curb and had this rare spin on his own, dropping to 5th place behind Berger, Boutsen and Prost. The Ferrari driver, however, was shaping up to change that, moving ahead of the Williams driver on lap 16. At the same time, Senna headed for the pits to change tyres, dropping further down the order to a lowly 10th in the process. Leader Mansell had a faulty electrical connection to his gear change, and when that faltered, Berger went through into the lead, while Prost was now not far behind. Mansell got it back in front again 7 laps later at his favourite overtaking spot, which left Berger's McLaren sandwiched by Ferraris, as Prost began to seek ways around the Austrian, eventually overtaking 4 laps later to move into 2nd place. The Frenchman's charge soon brought him up behind his troubled teammate, and at 2/3 distance, Prost swept past Mansell and into the lead, but the unfortunate Englishman lost drive altogether 12 laps later. Mansell pulled off onto the grass, later announcing his impending, although short-lived retirement from Formula One. Piquet, having started at the back of the grid when his new Ford engine wouldn't start, had a quick spin which let Senna take fourth place, and that became third when Berger retired from second place 4 laps from the end. There was last lap drama when Bernard managed to unlap himself and move ahead of Piquet to take fourth place, the Brazilian having lost his engine cover, which was producing unpredictable aerodynamics. But Prost won, taking his first ever hat-trick, win number 44, and now heading the World Championship by just 2 points from the lucky Senna, who finished behind Boutsen in third place. The second half of the season began at Hockenheim in Germany, where the McLarens used Honda's horsepower to take the front row, Senna ahead of Berger. The Brazilian made the best start, but behind there was drama when Modena's clutch failed on the line. The resulting chaos saw Pirro's Dallara crash heavily, the driver hit by his own wheel. Alliot's Ligier was also involved, although he was able to restart. At the front, however, Senna led teammate Berger from Prost and his teammate Mansell. Then came Patrese, Piquet and Nannini, although Piquet lost a place after this incident. Behind Senna, Berger and Prost, Mansell went wide. He damaged the underside of his Ferrari, promptly heading back to the pits, where healthier cars were having their tyre stops. Berger dropped from second to fifth. Prost was also in the pits, dropping from third to seventh. Mansell was out as far as he was concerned, and he would be joined in the pits by Senna, sent on his way with new tyres in just 6.2 seconds. But when he rejoined, he found himself in amongst a ready-made battle. Nannini was ahead of him, the Italian having chosen a harder compound tyre and not intending to change it, while behind was Patrese. For 15 laps, Senna would try all he could to overtake the Benetton driver ahead of him. For lap after lap, Nannini led Senna. After Patrese pitted, Nannini's teammate Piquet moved up to third, just ahead of Berger, but then his engine blew and the McLaren driver inherited that position. Prost passed Boutsen's Williams to take fourth place, in spite of that stationary yellow flag, warning of danger. For lap after lap, Senna attempted to find a way past Nannini, and even though he was on the newer tyres, the McLaren driver just could not overtake the Benetton until a backmarker fractionally slowed the Italian, allowing the Brazilian to get a good enough run to overtake. Once past, Senna quickly eased away to take victory. Nannini came through to take second place, and Berger was in third. The Brazilian led the World Championship again. 2 weeks later, the series moved to a liberated Hungary and the tight, popular Budapest circuit, where Thierry Boutsen claimed his first ever Formula One pole position. He nearly lost the lead to teammate Riccardo Patrese at the start, and Gerhard Berger tried to come round the outside. But Boutsen led as Senna was demoted by Mansell at the first corner, and then by Alesi at the second. Boutsen led. From Berger, Patrese, Mansell, Alesi, Senna, Nannini, De Cesaris, Piquet and Prost. Senna was an early pit visitor with a flat tyre, dropping from 5th to 7th. Prost's gearbox seized, causing a spin, while Berger also decided on a change of tyres, dropping him from 2nd to 6th. Behind Boutsen, Patrese now kept Mansell at bay, followed by Nannini and the recovered Senna. Mansell made things difficult for Nannini, but the Italian moved up to 3rd place as Senna watched. And then the Brazilian pushed the Englishman down another place as well. After they had disposed of the Ferrari, the pair then turned their attention to Patrese's Williams. Nannini overtook his compatriot, who had done such a good job protecting his teammate ahead, the Benetton now in 2nd place, while Senna followed him through into 3rd place. Patrese then gambled with a late tyre stop, which dropped him down to 8th. Senna tried to overtake Nannini in 2nd place, but the pair collided, putting the Italian out, but the Brazilian duly inherited his position. The Benetton driver was furious at Senna's opportunism, which is apparent in the slow-motion replay. Senna was able to continue. Now it was Boutsen, Senna, Mansell and Berger, until Berger did unto Mansell what Senna had done unto Nannini, except this time it cost Berger as dearly as it did Mansell, the Austrian retiring in the pits. All of which left Boutsen leading from a closing Senna, but the Brazilian made only one serious overtaking attempt, and despite constant pressure throughout the race, Boutsen drove to a faultless win. It was a win of which his team should have been proud, and yet he lost his drive at the end of the year. This was one of the great drives of the season, as his Brazilian rivals acknowledged. Boutsen returned to Belgium the conquering hero for his home Grand Prix, even if the sun didn't shine on the grid. At the start, Berger slotted in behind Senna, with Prost going into 3rd place and Boutsen 4th. But already Mansell had been nudged into the barrier by Piquet, and further back the two Lotuses collided, Donnelly pulling off. Later on the same lap, Modena and Nakajima came together, causing the Italian to spin. And all this resulted in a red flag. At the restart, Senna again made the better getaway, and as Prost wagged his tail, Boutsen dived down the inside of Berger, and we rode with Nannini in 4th place. Prost was next, before a gap to Mansell and Piquet, then Patrese and Alesi. But not everyone had made it safely through the Rédillon on lap 1. Barilla crashed heavily, and although he was unhurt, his car was badly damaged, and so was the Armco. So out came the red flag again. Senna led start number 3, with Prost trying to get inside Berger. But the Austrian followed his teammate around La Source hairpin from Prost, Boutsen, Nannini, Mansell, Patrese, Piquet, Capelli, Alesi, Modena, Nakajima and the rest. Patrese had moved up 2 places halfway through the first lap, with Mansell having already lost time. Ahead of Boutsen, Prost got past Berger at the bus stop chicane, and Boutsen got a lot closer using the curves. Berger was the first of the leaders to stop for tyres, dropping from 3rd to 6th, while Patrese retired with a broken gearbox, and Boutsen went out with broken transmission while lying 3rd, pulling onto the grass opposite the pits. Both Senna and Prost pitted for new tyres on lap 22, And here the race could be won or lost. Instead, it wasn't Prost that worried Senna. Instead, it was Nannini and his Benetton. It was much more important to come out of the pits ahead of the Benetton, for Nannini, as in Hockenheim, hadn't come in for tyres. Senna led Nannini. And as he pulled away, so Nannini dropped back into the clutches of Prost. But the Frenchman made short work of the Italian, moving up into second place on lap 27. Prost soon pulling away. Nannini was then slowly reeled in by Berger, and when his tyres momentarily lost grip at the Rédillon, Berger had the momentum to move up to third place. But victory was Senna's, the 25th in his career, and he extended his championship lead to 13 points ahead of second place Prost, while Berger was third. Senna, however, had never won at Monza, and the local fans certainly didn't want him to this time, so that Prost could keep his and Ferrari's championship hopes alive. The Frenchman was on the front row with Senna, although, as in Hockenheim, this circuit was thought to suit McLaren Honda's horsepower rather than Ferrari's better chassis and slightly less power. Consequently, McLaren's leading into the first chicane was no surprise, with Prost pushed down to third place and a remarkable Alesi nipping into fourth to keep his hopes of a Ferrari drive in 1991 alive as he overtook Mansell. Boutsen, Nannini, Gugelmin, Patrese and Piquet followed. Amazingly, Alesi braked very late to overtake Prost before the second chicane, while Patrese overtook Gugelmin. But as the leaders completed lap 1, Warwick understeered off the track at 150 miles per hour out of the Parabolica, his Lotus hit the barrier and crashed heavily. There was a brief oil fire, but the fuel tank stayed intact. Warwick miraculously crawled from the wreckage and strolled back across the track as though nothing had happened. The race was stopped, and he had a little jog down the pit lane to take the spare car, which proved his remarkable resilience. At the restart, Senna again made the better getaway, with Prost going into second place, only to be edged out by Berger, so that it was Senna, Berger, Prost, Alesi, Mansell, Patrese, Boutsen, Nannini and Piquet at the first chicane. Alesi again overtook Prost into the second chicane. And the Tyrrell driver was soon on the tail of the much more powerful McLarens ahead, leaving the Ferraris behind. But Alesi's place lasted just 4 laps before he got sideways, went over a curb and into the barrier and out of the race, perhaps a little too impetuous, too early on. Senna then led from Berger and Prost with Mansell fourth. But Berger was in trouble, having to pump his brakes, and Prost was able to nip past into second place behind leader Senna. The Benettons chose lap 31 to pit simultaneously. Nannini leaving first for tyres, promptly replaced by Piquet, who came in with a puncture. Senna then took the checkered flag and a win which, he said, was the most important one of the season. On the top step of the Monza rostrum for the first time, he and second place Prost later shook hands in reconciliation after their previous problems. The first stop in the Iberian doubleheader was Estoril and the Portuguese Grand Prix, second home to Brazilians. But Senna was back on row 2 behind Mansell and Prost in the Ferraris. At the start, Mansell curiously swerved in front of Prost, and the Frenchman had to back off, allowing the two McLarens easy access on the cleaner outside line to take the lead into the first corner. Senna leading from Berger, Mansell, Piquet and Prost, already a furious fifth, having started on the front row. De Cesaris's choice of outside line proved less fruitful as he spun off. Prost soon disposed of Piquet, while ahead of him, Mansell had closed on Berger. Senna wasn't far ahead, but after 27 hard-fought laps, Mansell suddenly ran wide and Prost nipped through to third place. Two McLarens still versus two Ferraris. Only the driver order had changed. Mansell pitted for tyres almost immediately, dropping from 4th to 5th, just behind Nannini's Benetton. A lap later, it was Senna's turn to pit for new tyres, but watch out for Berger. His shadow, Prost, who nipped out to take the lead down into the first corner of lap 30. Senna was soon on his way again, rejoining third. But then Prost pitted from the lead and trouble with the left rear wheel cost him 3 or 4 seconds. And that left him down in 5th place. Berger's pit stop a lap later left Senna in the lead, but Mansell was right up with him. And on lap 50, he swooped past and into the lead at just the same spot as they collided in 1989. Mansell began to pull away, but back markers closed up the gap again, not only to Mansell's cost, but also Alio's, for instance, for his lack of caution cost him dearly. He was thankfully unhurt, but he admitted that he just hadn't seen Mansell coming. Alio on his way back to the pits, while Prost closed on the leading group and in spite of gearbox problems, swooped past Berger and closed on Senna just ahead. Could he now overtake the Brazilian? We would never know, for Alex Caffi and Aguri Suzuki collided to the detriment of the Arrows driver. The Italian was trapped by his ankle in the car and the race was wisely stopped in order to extract him. Mansell was acclaimed winner. Senna now had an 18-point lead in the series as they headed for Spain and the bodegas of Jerez. Senna was on pole position for the 50th time in his career, but Prost and Mansell were behind him. When the lights turned green, Senna made the best start, with Prost going second, while Berger was in danger of being squeezed out behind Mansell until he eased over on Alesi, who in turn eased over on Patrese, whose nose wing punctured Alesi's rear tyre, causing him to spin off. Ahead of Berger were Senna, Prost and Mansell, while Senna was tantalisingly ahead of Prost. The Frenchman was attacking hard and holding station behind the Brazilian, part of his race strategy for which he now had the full support of both Ferrari management and his teammate. Warwick was up to a good 6th following the serious accident to teammate Donnelly, but he dropped to 12th with this tyre stop. After Mansell and Berger stopped for tyres, it was Prost's turn to come in, and even though he was stationary for just 6.1 seconds, he dropped to 4th place behind Piquet, Senna and Mansell. Senna then pitted for tyres and was sent on his way in just 5.1 seconds. As he rejoined, Mansell came by, waving Prost up to 2nd place behind the non-stop Piquet. Senna challenged Mansell, and although the Englishman made it hard for the Brazilian, Senna went through into 3rd place behind Piquet and Prost. Piquet was tantalisingly close to Prost, and of course the Frenchman was on the newer tyres. But after just a couple of laps, the Brazilian conveniently ran wide. And Prost was through and into the lead, and Senna passed Piquet equally easily. The McLaren driver was in trouble, however, with water from a Hold radiator spraying onto the right rear tyre, and he waved Mansell through to 2nd place as his engine began to complain from lack of coolant. The Brazilian pulled off to retire 20 laps from the end. There was no more luck for his teammate either. For trying to take 4th place from Boutsen, the pair collided to Berger's detriment. Warwick's brave drive also came to a premature end when the Lotus's gearbox failed when Warwick was lying 7th. Prost then was able to head for the checkered flag and his 44th Grand Prix victory. He had now closed to within 9 points of series leader Senna. Both his and Ferrari's chances were still alive after the team's second 1-2 of the year, once again working as a team. The stage was set then for a great showdown in the final 2 Grand Prix, with Japan as the first stop in Prost's attempt to stay in contention. In front of a huge and expectant crowd, Senna was on pole, but not on the cleanest part of the track, so that Prost made the better getaway, with Senna behind him. Prost left a gap beside him, Senna went for it, hit Prost's car, and within seconds it was all over as the pair spun off into the dust in a very premature ending to the championship, strangely reminiscent of the previous year. The drivers climbed from their cars, one the elated world champion, the other the devastated loser. Grand Prix workers, drivers, cognoscenti and fans are divided as to whose fault it was, so make up your own minds. But Prost does get the better start and at one point moves right, almost inviting Senna to try for the inside. The accident left Mansell second to Berger, but suddenly the Austrian went off on the dust left by his teammate's accident, and Mansell was through and into the lead, closely followed by the Benettons, Piquet being pursued by his new teammate and former protégé Roberto Moreno, who was substituting for Nannini, badly injured in a helicopter crash. Further back, Suzuki was making great progress, overtaking Warwick to move into 6th place, to the delight of his countrymen. They were also cheering Nakajima in the Tyrrell too, chasing Johnny Herbert, who was replacing the injured Donnelly in the second Lotus. Mansell had a 7-second lead over the Benettons when he came in for fresh tyres, whereas the Benettons were, as usual, planning to go non-stop. As Mansell left the pit, though, he lit up his rear tyres and promptly broke a drive shaft. To his intense frustration, he could do nothing more than pull off and into retirement. The Benettons were now first and second. Herbert retired his Lotus from 8th place with engine failure as Piquet headed for the checkered flag, with no threat from his new teammate behind. Nakajima moved up to 6th place ahead of Warwick after a long battle which also involved Herbert for a time. But Warwick retired with gearbox failure. The Williamses chased the Benettons, but Patrese dropped back with a tyre stop, which promoted the amazing Suzuki to 3rd place, wheeled on by his countrymen. However, nothing could stop Piquet as he swept to his first victory in 3 years, followed home by his teammate, Moreno taking 2nd place in what was only his 8th Grand Prix, after struggling with the Eurobrunn at the back of the field this year. With Suzuki also in the first 3 for the first time, it was a very happy podium in Japan. The championship might have been settled, but nothing was going to stop the Aussies having a party, even if Alain Prost didn't want to be included in the end-of-term photograph. Senna was once again on pole position and led off the grid, although the Ferraris were attacking Berger, who made a poor start, but still slotted into 2nd place ahead of Mansell, Prost, Alesi, Piquet, Patrese, Boutsen, Moreno and the rest. With Senna easing away, Berger came under pressure from Mansell, and when he briefly knocked off his ignition switch, the Englishman was through and into 2nd place, leaving Berger to defend 3rd place from Prost and Piquet. Piquet moved ahead of the Frenchman and then caught Berger, slipstreaming the McLaren down the straight and overtaking the Austrian to move into 3rd place. That became 2nd when Mansell first of all spun, then rejoined and finally pitted for tyres, dropping to 5th place just after half distance. 3rd-placed Berger ran wide at the top of the Brabham Straight, which allowed Prost to move ahead of him. But teammate Senna was in even more drastic trouble, finding it hard to get second gear, which eventually saw him understeer straight off and into the barrier and out of the race for the third consecutive Grand Prix. Not a very satisfactory end to his World Championship year. Behind Piquet, Mansell overtook Berger and caught second-place teammate Prost, who was unable to do anything but let the Englishman past and into second place. Mansell, on his newer tyres, was 11.3 seconds behind Piquet, and when the Brazilian ran wide, the Englishman closed right up on the leader, and the prospects were for a last-lap showdown. Piquet, however, reacted and was able to keep Mansell at bay as they sped through the streets of Adelaide in this final round of the World Championship. Who would have the honour of winning the 500th World Championship round? Third place Prost was another to run wide at the top of Brabham Straight, but with no drastic effect. On the last lap, Mansell tried hard to overtake Piquet at the end of the straight, but he wasn't quite close enough, locked up and ran wide, allowing Piquet to head for the checkered flag for the second race running, winning this 500th round of the FIA's World Championship. Mansell led the charge in second place after a thrilling last lap. Prost was a disconsolate third. And that was the 1990 World Championship season, the year in which Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost fought a titanic duel and proved themselves the best in the world. But once again, it was the McLaren and their driver Ayrton Senna who triumphed as world champions.